The empty display case stared back at me like a wound. Where my father's purple heart should have gleamed under the kitchen light, there was nothing but dust outlines and empty velvet. Where his bronze star had rested for 15 years since his funeral, only shadows remained on the faded fabric. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I stood frozen in the doorway of what used to be Dad's study, my coffee mug trembling in my hands. The mahogany display case that had been his pride and joy sat violated and hollow. 3 purple hearts, 2 bronze stars, a silver star, his Vietnam service medal, and countless other honors that represented 30 years of military service, all gone. My stepmother Cheryl hummed cheerfully from the kitchen, the sound drifting through the house like nothing had happened. Like she hadn't just erased the most precious remnants of my father's legacy while I was away at my deployment reunion weekend. I'd only been gone for 3 days. 3 days to honor my own squadron, to remember the friends we lost, to carry forward the military traditions Dad had instilled in me since childhood. The same traditions that now lay scattered to whatever pawnshops or collectors Cheryl had found willing to buy stolen valor. The sound of her heels clicking across the hardwood floors announced her approach. She appeared in the doorway wearing one of her expensive blazers, probably purchased with money from Dad's medals, and that practiced smile she'd perfected during their 5-year marriage. "Oh, good, you're back," she said brightly, as if I hadn't just discovered the most devastating theft imaginable. "How was your little soldier reunion?" I set my coffee mug down carefully on Dad's old desk, the same desk where he used to sit and tell me stories about each medal, about the men who didn't come home, about the weight of service and sacrifice. My voice came out steadier than I felt. "Where are they, Cheryl?" "Where are what, honey?" The endearment felt like acid. She'd never called me honey when Dad was alive. "My father's medals. Every single one of them." She had the audacity to look surprised, raising her perfectly shaped eyebrows in mock confusion. "Oh, those old things? I donated them to charity. They were just collecting dust, taking up space. This house needs to move forward, not stay trapped in the past." Donated. She called 30 years of military honor, 2 tours in Vietnam, a career spent defending the freedoms she enjoyed daily. Old things. The casual dismissal hit harder than any physical blow could have. Donated to what charity? I kept my voice level, though every instinct screamed to tear through the house looking for any trace of what she'd stolen. Does it matter? They're helping people now instead of just sitting there reminding us of sad times. She moved to Dad's desk and began straightening papers with proprietary confidence. Besides, Kevin needs the space for his home office setup. He's starting his investment consulting business, and this room has the best natural light. Kevin, her 32-year-old son who'd moved in 6 months after Dad's funeral. The same Kevin who'd never held a job longer than 8 months, who spent his days playing video games and complaining about how the world owed him opportunities he'd never earned. "This was Dad's space," I said quietly. "Was being the operative word. Your father is gone, and life moves on. You can't expect me to maintain some sort of shrine forever." But it hadn't been a shrine. It had been a reminder of service, of sacrifice, of the values that shaped not just Dad's life but mine. Those medals represented the best of what it meant to serve something greater than yourself. They were earned in jungles and deserts, in moments when ordinary people chose to do extraordinary things. I walked to the window where Dad used to stand every morning, looking out at the flagpole he'd installed in the backyard. The American flag still flew there, though I wondered how long it would be before Cheryl decided it was too much trouble to maintain. "I want the name of the charity," I said, still facing the window. "I don't remember exactly. Some veterans organization." They were very grateful. The lie came so easily I almost believed she'd convinced herself it was true. But I'd spent 8 years in military intelligence. I knew when someone was constructing fiction on the spot. "And you didn't think to ask me first?" "Ask you?" Her voice sharpened. This is my house now. Those were my belongings to dispose of as I saw fit. My house. My belongings. As if Dad's entire life, his service, his sacrifice, had become her property to liquidate at will. I turned to face her fully. Cheryl stood behind Dad's desk like she owned it. Like she'd earned the right to stand where a man who'd bled for his country once planned strategies and wrote letters to Gold Star families. Where did you really sell them? I told you, I donated. Cheryl. I used the same tone I'd perfected as a squadron leader, the one that cut through excuses and demanded truth. Where did you sell my father's medals? For the first time, her confidence cracked slightly. She fidgeted with her bracelet, another expensive piece I was certain Dad had never purchased for her. I needed money for Kevin's business loan down payment. Banks require more documentation these days, and your father's pension doesn't stretch as far as you might think. There it was, the truth beneath the charitable fiction. She'd sold a war hero's honors to fund her unemployed son's latest get-rich-quick scheme. I nodded slowly, processing not just what she'd done, but how she'd done it. The calculated timing, waiting until I was away. The pre-planned story about donation and charity. The casual way she'd violated something sacred for something as mundane as a business loan for a man who'd never earned anything in his life. I see, I said finally. I knew you'd understand. You're practical, like your father was. He would have wanted his things to help family. But Dad had always said that earned honors should stay with those who understood their value. He'd specifically told me the medals would be mine someday. Not because they were valuable objects, but because they represented values worth preserving. I looked around the room one final time, memorizing how it had looked when it still held traces of the man who'd raised me to understand duty, honor, and the patient kind of justice that comes to those who serve something greater than themselves. You're right, I said. Dad was practical. He taught me that actions have consequences, and that sometimes the best response is the one people don't see coming. Cheryl's smile returned, clearly relieved that I was accepting her theft with such grace. She had no idea what was coming. I waited until Cheryl left for her weekly spa appointment before I began. 20 years in military intelligence had taught me that information was power, and power required patience. She thought my calm acceptance meant defeat. She had no idea it meant preparation. The first call went to Master Sergeant Rodriguez at the local Veterans Affairs office. Carlos and I had served 2 deployments together, and he'd transitioned helping fellow veterans navigate the bureaucracy after his retirement. More importantly, he understood the sacred nature of military honors. Tommy, good to hear from you, his voice crackled through the phone. What can I do for you? I need a favor, Carlos. Someone sold my father's medal collection without authorization. Full set from Vietnam, including Purple Hearts and a Silver Star. The line went quiet. When Carlos spoke again, his tone had shifted to pure business. Stolen valor items? Stolen and sold. I need to know where they went and how to get them back. Send me the details. Service record, medal citations, any photos you have. We'll flag them in the system and start tracking. Anyone tries to sell military honors, they go through specific channels. We can trace this. Next, I called Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell at the military police unit on base. Sarah had been Dad's protege during his final years of service, and she'd spoken at his funeral about how he'd shaped her understanding of military justice. Sarah, it's Tommy Brennan. I need advice about recovering stolen military property. What kind of property? My father's entire medal collection. My stepmother sold them while I was away. The silence stretched longer than Carlos's had. When Sarah spoke, her voice carried the chill of someone who'd prosecuted military crimes for 15 years. Send me everything. Service records, witness statements, any documentation of the sale. If she sold them across state lines, it becomes federal. If she misrepresented them as donations for tax purposes, that's fraud. If she sold them to dealers who knew they were stolen, that's trafficking in stolen government property. By evening, I had a network of 8 military contacts working different angles. The pawn shop database search from Rodriguez. The federal investigation angle from Mitchell. The military collector network from Chief Petty Officer Barnes, who specialized in authenticating metals for estate sales. Each conversation revealed the same truth. Military honors weren't just valuable collectibles. They were traceable government property with specific legal protections. Selling them without proper authorization was a federal crime, especially when fraud was involved. My phone buzzed with the first breakthrough at 7 p.m. Carlos had found them. "Tommy, we got a hit. 3 pawn shops in the next county over, all visited on the same day. Your stepmother's signature on the paperwork, claiming they were inherited property she had full rights to sell. How much? $4,000 total. For a collection worth at least $20,000 to legitimate collectors. She'd sold Dad's entire military legacy for less than she probably spent on her monthly shopping trips. The casual dismissal of their value hurt almost as much as their theft. There's more," Carlos continued. "She claimed on the paperwork that she was your father's only surviving family member. That's fraud, since you exist and she knew it." The second breakthrough came from Chief Barnes an hour later. "Tommy, I tracked the Silver Star through the collector network. It's already been resold to a private collector in Texas. But here's the thing. The guy who bought it is former Army. When he finds out it was stolen from a veteran's family, he's going to want to make this right." By midnight, I had a complete picture. Cheryl had systematically visited pawn shops in 3 different counties, selling Dad's metals over the course of 2 days. She'd falsified information on multiple forms, claimed tax-deductible donations that never happened, and violated federal laws protecting military honors. But the most damaging evidence came from Kevin himself. While researching his supposed business venture, I discovered his social media post from the weekend I was away. Photos of him holding Dad's medals, captioned with jokes about liquidating old man's junk, and, quote, funding the future with the past. He'd documented the entire theft process, apparently proud of their efficient conversion of worthless military stuff into cash. The posts showed him wearing Dad's Purple Heart like a costume jewelry piece, making mock salutes to the camera. In one video, he'd used Dad's bronze star as a bottle opener, while explaining to his friends how, quote, these old guys never even fought in real wars anyway. Each image felt like a physical blow, but they were also evidence. Kevin had created a documented trail of desecration and theft that would be admissible in both criminal and civil proceedings. I screenshotted everything before he could delete it, though I suspected Kevin was too arrogant to think anyone would challenge their actions. The final piece came from my research into Cheryl's finances. As Dad's widow, she received his full military pension, his Social Security survivor benefits, and had inherited his life insurance policy worth $200,000. She wasn't struggling financially. She'd stolen and sold Dad's honors purely to fund Kevin's business dreams without touching her own resources. Wednesday morning brought the confrontation I'd been preparing for. Cheryl returned from her spa day refreshed and cheerful, expecting to find me resigned to her theft. Instead, she found me sitting at Dad's desk with a folder full of evidence and a very different kind of conversation waiting. "Oh, you're still here," she said, surprised to find me in what she now considered Kevin's future office space. "We need to talk." "About what?" "I thought we settled the metal situation yesterday." I opened the folder and spread out the printed screenshots of Kevin's social media posts. Her face went pale as she saw her son wearing Dad's Purple Heart like a party accessory. "These were posted while I was at my reunion," I said calmly. Kevin documented the entire theft and desecration process. Every pawn shop, every illegal sale, every law you both broke. Cheryl sank into the chair across from Dad's desk, her confidence evaporating as she realized the scope of evidence I'd gathered. "Now," I continued, "we're going to discuss how you're going to fix this." Cheryl stared at the evidence spread across Dad's desk like she was looking at her own obituary. The screenshots of Kevin's social media posts formed a timeline of federal crimes, each image more damaging than the last. Her hands shook as she picked up the photo of her son using Dad's bronze star as a bottle opener. "This can't be real," she whispered. "Kevin wouldn't post these things. Check his account yourself." I slid my phone across the desk, though I should mention that federal investigators will be downloading everything before he can delete it. Her face went ashen. Federal investigators? Theft of military property across state lines is a federal crime, Cheryl. Fraudulent sale of government honors carries up to 10 years in prison. Kevin's social media posts prove intent to desecrate military honors, which adds another 5 years minimum. I pulled out the next set of documents. Then there's the tax fraud. You claimed charitable donations for items you actually sold for profit. The IRS tends to take that personally. I didn't know. You signed paperwork at 3 different pawnshops claiming you were Dad's only surviving family member. You knew exactly what you were doing. The kitchen door slammed open and Kevin stormed in, apparently having overheard our conversation. He wore the same arrogant expression from his social media posts, clearly expecting to intimidate me into backing down. "This is ridiculous," he announced. "Those medals belong to Mom now. We had every right to sell them." I looked at this man who'd never served a day in his life, who'd spent his 20s bouncing between failed ventures, while Dad's pension supported his lifestyle, who'd desecrated military honors for beer money. "Kevin, you posted yourself committing federal crimes on social media. The FBI has a whole department dedicated to prosecuting people exactly like you." His bluster faltered. "What are you talking about?" I held up the printed screenshot of him wearing Dad's Purple Heart. "This medal represents wounds suffered in service to our country. You wore it as a joke while bragging about stealing it." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. That's not just theft, Kevin. That's desecration of military honors under federal law. You can't prove anything. I don't have to prove anything. You already did. I gestured to the pile of evidence. Timestamps, GPS locations, documented admissions of guilt. You created a prosecutor's dream case. Cheryl found her voice again. "What do you want?" "I want Dad's medals back. All of them. Today." "The pawn shops won't just give them back." "Actually, they will." I pulled out another document. Master Sergeant Rodriguez contacted each shop this morning. When they learned the medals were stolen military property, they immediately agreed to return them. Turns out, pawn shop owners don't enjoy federal charges either. Kevin scoffed. "So you get your precious medals back. Big deal." "The medals are just the beginning, Kevin." I opened my laptop and turned it toward them. "See, while you were posting evidence of your crimes online, I was documenting every aspect of this theft. Screenshots, financial records, witness statements from the pawnshop owners." The screen showed the first page of a federal complaint I'd been preparing with Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell's assistance. Cheryl's name appeared 17 times in the first paragraph alone. "This complaint goes to the FBI field office tomorrow unless every single medal is returned, and you both agree to my terms." "What terms?" Cheryl's voice was barely a whisper. "You move out of Dad's house within 30 days. The property deed shows it was supposed to transfer to me upon your death or remarriage anyway. Dad never intended for Kevin to inherit a veteran's home." "This is my house," Cheryl protested. "No, it was Dad's house, left in trust for his surviving child. You were granted residence rights that you've now forfeited through criminal activity." I pulled out the final document, one that had taken me 2 days to prepare with a military lawyer's assistance. "You'll also sign this agreement stating that you unlawfully disposed of military property belonging to Staff Sergeant Michael Brennan's estate. Kevin will sign a confession acknowledging his role in the theft and desecration. Both signatures are witnessed and notarized." "And if we don't sign?" Kevin asked, though his earlier confidence had completely evaporated. "Then tomorrow morning, federal agents arrest you both for theft of government property, interstate trafficking of stolen goods, tax fraud, and in Kevin's case, desecration of military honors." The evidence package is already prepared. The room fell silent except for the ticking of Dad's old military-issued wall clock. Cheryl stared at the confession document like it was a death sentence. Kevin looked back and forth between his mother and me, finally understanding that his social media bragging had destroyed them both. "How long do we have to decide?" Cheryl asked. "The pawn shops close at 6 p.m. If Dad's medals aren't back in this display case by then, the federal complaint gets filed tonight." It took them until 4:30 p.m., but every medal came home. The Purple Hearts, the Bronze Stars, the Silver Star. Even Dad's Vietnam service medal, that Kevin had apparently tried to use as a coaster. Some showed scratches from their mistreatment, but they were intact. As I placed each medal back in its proper position in Dad's display case, I felt his presence in the room again. The empty shadows were filled with honor restored, with justice served through patience rather than rage. Cheryl signed the papers without reading them carefully. Kevin scrawled his name like a sullen teenager, clearly hoping this would all just disappear. They had no idea I'd also sent copies of everything to the American Legion, the VFW, and the Military Order of the Purple Heart, ensuring that Kevin's name would be permanently associated with his crimes in every veteran database. 2 weeks later, I stood in Dad's study, my study now, arranging the medals exactly as he'd kept them. The house felt different with Cheryl and Kevin gone, like it could breathe again. A knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. I opened it to find Master Sergeant Rodriguez holding a large wooden case. "From the guys at the VFW," he said. "We heard what happened and wanted to make sure your father's medals had proper protection." The case was beautiful hardwood with brass fittings and a secure lock. Inside, each medal had its own fitted compartment, lined with military green felt. "Rodriguez, this is too much." "No, Tommy. What you did, standing up to thieves who desecrate a veteran's honor, that's what we expect from military families. Your father would be proud." As I transferred Dad's medals to their new case, I thought about the difference between earned honor and stolen valor, between justice and revenge, between the patient strength Dad had taught me and the immediate gratification that destroyed Kevin's future. 6 months later, I received a letter from Kevin. Brief, handwritten, admitting he'd never understood what the medals meant until he faced federal charges for stealing them. He'd enlisted in the Army, he wrote, hoping to someday earn the right to understand what his stepfather had sacrificed. Some lessons can only be learned the hard way. But Dad always said the military builds character in those willing to be shaped by something greater than themselves. Even thieves apparently could learn honor if the consequences were clear enough. 3 months after the medals came home, I was organizing Dad's military paperwork when the call came from the Department of Veterans Affairs. The voice on the other end was crisp, professional, with the kind of authority that made you stand straighter even over the phone. "Mr. Brennan, this is Colonel Janet Walsh from the VA's Medal Review Board. I need to schedule a meeting with you regarding your father's service record." My stomach dropped. After everything with Cheryl and Kevin, the last thing I needed was some bureaucratic review questioning Dad's honors. "Is there a problem with his medals?" "On the contrary. We've discovered something that requires immediate attention. Can you come to the regional office tomorrow at 10 a.m.? And please bring your father's complete medal collection." I spent the night wondering what they'd found. Dad had always been modest about his service, never one to embellish stories or claim credit he hadn't earned. The idea that something might be wrong with his record felt impossible. The VA regional office was a maze of beige corridors and fluorescent lights, but Colonel Walsh's office felt different. The walls displayed photographs of medal ceremonies, unit citations, and the kind of military memorabilia that spoke to someone who understood the weight of service. Colonel Walsh was younger than I'd expected, maybe mid-40s, with silver eagles on her uniform and the bearing of someone who'd earned every promotion. She gestured to a chair across from her desk where several thick files lay open. "Mr. Brennan, your father's case came to our attention through some unusual circumstances. When Master Sergeant Rodriguez reported the theft and recovery of your father's medals, it triggered a review of his service record. What we found was concerning." She opened the top file and turned it toward me. Inside were photocopies of military documents I'd never seen before. Orders and citations dating back to Dad's Vietnam service. "Your father was recommended for the Distinguished Service Cross in 1968. The paperwork was filed, approved at multiple levels, but the medal was never awarded due to an administrative error. The recommendation was lost in a file transfer when his unit was relocated." I stared at the documents, trying to process what she was saying. The Distinguished Service Cross was the second highest military decoration, just below the Medal of Honor. "We have witness statements from 3 surviving members of his unit describing the action that earned this recommendation. Your father single-handedly held a position under enemy fire for 6 hours, allowing his wounded squad to be evacuated. He was shot twice during the action but refused medical evacuation until every man in his unit was safe. She turned to another page, showing a hand-drawn map of the battlefield, with annotations in Dad's careful handwriting describing the tactical situation. According to the statements, your father never mentioned this incident to his family. He considered it just doing his job. But his commanding officer filed the recommendation immediately after the action, calling it the most extraordinary display of courage under fire he'd witnessed in 2 tours. The room seemed to spin slightly. Dad had never told me about being shot twice. He'd mentioned Vietnam occasionally, usually to emphasize the importance of taking care of your fellow soldiers, but never with specific details about his own actions. There's more, Colonel Walsh continued. During our review, we also discovered that your father was eligible for the Vietnam Gallantry Cross, awarded by the South Vietnamese government to Allied forces. Again, the paperwork was filed but never processed due to administrative backlog. She pulled out a third file, this one containing correspondence between various military offices spanning decades. Your father spent 30 years in service, Mr. Brennan. He was the kind of soldier who kept his head down, did his job, and never asked for recognition he'd earned. Unfortunately, that meant several honors slipped through bureaucratic cracks. I thought about Dad's modest display case, how he'd arranged his medals with such care but never spoke about how he'd earned them. He'd raised me to understand that service was its own reward, that doing the right thing didn't require public recognition. What does this mean now? I asked. It means we're going to correct 60-year-old mistakes. The Army is prepared to award your father the Distinguished Service Cross posthumously. The Vietnamese government has also agreed to present the Gallantry Cross. These ceremonies don't usually happen for deceased recipients, but given the extraordinary circumstances and the recent theft attempt, the Pentagon has approved a full military honors presentation. She leaned back in her chair, studying my reaction. There's one more thing. When news of the theft reached military leadership, it sparked a review of how we protect veteran families from this kind of exploitation. Your case is being used as a model for new federal legislation protecting military honors from theft and desecration. The irony wasn't lost on me. Cheryl and Kevin's greed had accidentally triggered an investigation that revealed Dad's true service record. Their attempt to profit from his sacrifice had instead led to him receiving recognition that was 56 years overdue. The ceremony will be held at Arlington National Cemetery if you approve. Full military honors, with representatives from every branch of service. Your father's sacrifice will be recognized at the highest levels. I nodded, unable to speak past the emotion lodging in my throat. One final detail, Colonel Walsh said, closing the files. We've been tracking similar cases of stolen military honors. Your stepmother and her son's case has become a landmark prosecution. The FBI is using their social media evidence to train agents in digital investigation techniques for military property theft. She smiled slightly. Kevin's decision to document his crimes online has inadvertently helped protect other veteran families from similar theft. His stupidity is being used to educate law enforcement across the country. Driving home, I thought about Dad's quiet strength, how he'd served with distinction for 3 decades without seeking recognition for his most heroic actions. He'd taught me that true honor came from doing the right thing when no one was watching, from serving something greater than yourself without expecting reward. Cheryl and Kevin had tried to steal his legacy for immediate profit. Instead, they'd accidentally ensured that his real service would be recognized at the highest levels of government. Dad's final lesson was about patience, about how justice sometimes takes decades to arrive but comes completely when it does. The Distinguished Service Cross ceremony was scheduled for Veterans Day. As I polished Dad's medals in preparation for their journey to Arlington, I realized that the empty display case I'd found that terrible morning had led to something Dad never could have imagined. His quiet heroism would finally receive the recognition it deserved, not because he'd sought it, but because thieves had tried to steal it. Sometimes the worst attempts to destroy honor only make it shine brighter. Arlington National Cemetery in November was breathtaking. Thousands of white headstones stretched across rolling hills under a crisp blue sky, each one representing a life given in service to something greater. I stood at the ceremonial platform holding the wooden case containing Dad's medals, watching military personnel from every branch prepare for a ceremony 56 years in the making. General Harrison, a 3-star who'd flown in specifically for this presentation, approached with the kind of presence that commanded rooms. Behind him walked Colonel Walsh, and a delegation of officers whose dress uniforms gleamed with their own hard-earned decorations. "Mr. Brennan," General Harrison said, extending his hand, "your father's service record is extraordinary. Men like Staff Sergeant Michael Brennan are why we still enjoy the freedoms we have today." The ceremony began with the posting of colors, the American flag snapping in the wind as an honor guard presented arms. As the general spoke about Dad's heroic action in Vietnam, I found myself learning details about my father that he'd never shared. How he'd crawled through enemy fire to reach wounded soldiers. How he'd used his own body to shield a medic treating casualties. How he'd held that position for 6 hours while outnumbered and under constant attack. When General Harrison presented the Distinguished Service Cross, the medal caught the sunlight like Dad's old display case used to do in the kitchen. The citation read aloud spoke of extraordinary heroism, of selfless service, of the kind of courage that defined the greatest generation of American warriors. The Vietnamese Gallantry Cross followed, presented by Colonel Nguyen from the Vietnamese Defense Attaché Office. His words about international brotherhood and shared sacrifice would have made Dad proud of the relationships he'd helped forge in those distant jungles. As the ceremony concluded with a 21-gun salute, I thought about Cheryl and Kevin. Their greed had backfired so completely it seemed almost orchestrated by divine justice. Kevin's social media posts bragging about stealing quote 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 and in quote 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 and in quote 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 Wesity's militative reviews had triggered Federal me del and quote 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 legislative reviews, and ultimately this ceremony recognizing Dad's true valor. The last I'd heard, Kevin had completed basic training and was serving as a supply clerk at Fort Benning. His commanding officer, apparently aware of his history, had made sure he understood military tradition through extensive education about honor and sacrifice. Cheryl had moved to Florida, living quietly on what remained of her savings after legal fees and restitution payments. After the ceremony, General Harrison approached me privately. "Your father's case has changed how we protect military families. New federal legislation passed last month makes trafficking in stolen military honors a 20-year felony." Kevin's documented desecration helped lawmakers understand the severity of these crimes. He handed me a final document. Congress has also established the Staff Sergeant Michael Brennan Memorial Fund to assist veteran families dealing with honor theft. Your father's name will help protect other families from what you experienced. I drove home with Dad's medals in their new place of honor, but also with the Distinguished Service Cross and Gallantry Cross that represented his true legacy. The display case now held not just the honors he'd quietly carried for decades, but the recognition that justice, though delayed, had finally arrived. That evening, I received an unexpected visitor. Master Sergeant Rodriguez stood at my door with a young soldier in dress uniform, barely 19 years old. "Tommy, this is Private Martinez. He's Kevin's bunkmate at Benning." Kid wanted to meet the son of the hero, whose story changed his perspective on military service. Private Martinez stood at attention, nervous but determined. "Sir, your stepbrother tells everyone about what happened with your father's medals. How stealing military honors brought federal charges. How disrespecting service members destroys lives. He says meeting you taught him that some things are sacred." Rodriguez smiled. Kevin's become quite the advocate for military tradition. Turns out facing federal prison time for desecrating a war hero's medals gives a man perspective on what really matters. As they left, I returned to Dad's study, now permanently mine. The medals gleamed in their case, but more importantly, Dad's legacy lived on in legislation protecting other veteran families, in the education of young soldiers who would carry forward his values, and in the knowledge that sometimes the worst intentions create the best outcomes. I opened my laptop and began typing an email to the Military History Foundation, offering to donate Dad's complete service records to their archive. His story of quiet heroism deserved to inspire future generations of Americans who would face their own moments requiring extraordinary courage. Outside, The flag Dad had installed still flew over the backyard, illuminated by floodlights I'd added for the evening colors ceremony. Each night at sunset, I lowered it with the same precision he'd taught me as a child, folding it with the respect due to the symbol men like him had bled to defend. Justice had taken 56 years to arrive, but it had come completely. Dad's sacrifice was finally recognized, his legacy protected, and his values carried forward by soldiers who would never know his name, but would benefit from his example. Sometimes the best revenge is living well enough to see your enemies destroy themselves, while your own honor only grows brighter. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.